Cool. So moving on from the first section of the Great Disaster, we move into the second part of the Light of the Jedi, which is entitled The Paths. And in between each of the sections, they have a little interlude. And this one begins talking about the Nile, who are kind of the baddies of the current time. In this point in the story, they're fairly relatively unknown, and they're sort of limited to the Outer Rim. But the book does a great quote immediately to sort of set the tone for who they are, and says they moved like spirits and killed like the devils, which I think is a really great way of introducing them. And their sort of interlude and then opening chapter basically shows them going on a raid, which you see is pretty ruthless. They use gas to knock out and kill the crew of a ship that they're raiding, and sort of move fast and furious and sort of come out of the shadows. And the Nile sort of consists of a variety of different species, but all wear masks to sort of have some form of unity, but also that protects them because they do repeatedly sort of use this gas technique as sort of one of their sort of methods to kill or disable their targets. And the Nile are led by a man named Marchion Rowe. I don't know. It's Marchion. I don't know if you guys
In the audiobook, they call him Marchion Rowe.
Okay, so I started doing Marchion, but I felt like before I'd heard it as Marchion, so I didn't know. But so Marchion Rowe is sort of the leader of them. That he's known as the Eye, and there's sort of a hierarchy within the Nile of the Eye at the head. Below him is the Tempest Runners. The three of them are Pan Ida, Lorna D, and Kassav. And each of them are sort of three branches of the Nile that have their own sort of fleets and almost military group that they are able to sort of recruit for and operate on their own. Within that, they have their own hierarchy of people can move in. They come as a strike. They move up to a cloud. And then they can move up to a storm, which is sort of the people that are just under the Tempest Runners. And each of the Tempest Runners can sort of do as they please, as long as the Tempest Runners and the Eye sort of vote on it and agree on it. In the case of a tie, or just at any time, the Eye technically gets 2 votes because he's sort of the head. And the way they all function is that they have this thing, the rule of 3. So they kind of split the rewards of any raids or pillaging that they do, where a third of it goes to the Eye, and then the rest is divvied up amongst the crews. The Eye sort of is in the leadership position. Marchion Rowe is in the leadership position because his father had created these things called the path engines, which basically are they use what's just called paths to jump to different hyperspace points in a lot quicker and a lot more efficient and almost rapid and sporadic fashion than just a single hyperlane, which allows them to get from A to B in a lot shorter period and a lot quicker period. And it's kind of this unknown sort of element that they're sort of, the Eye has someone that we'll get to that is sort of mapping these different paths, and has created sort of a hideout for them. This sort of relates to what you're saying, Dan, with the Wayfinder from Rise of Skywalker, that they're in some, unknown, uncharted territory that they're able to get to by jumping between these points along the paths that, makes them hidden from anyone else. But it allows them to sort of jump in, commit a raid, and disappear in this sort of fast and furious. I know a lot of the authors were comparing them to Vikings. They kind of just do this raiding and pillaging approach to things. Within the Nile themselves, there's kind of an uneasy alliance because Marchion believes that one of the Tempest Runners had killed his father, and so for that reason sort of contains all the path knowledge for himself. So they definitely senses that at least one of the Tempest Runners, if not all 3, would like to kill him and take their place. But they know that without him and without these paths, they wouldn't be able to sort of continue on the path that they've been going on as the Nile. As sort of we get introduced to them, Marchion is wanting to slow down the raids that his teams are going on, just based on the Legacy Run incident has occurred, and that's brought a lot of heat into the galaxy. So there's a lot of Republic ships, there's a lot of Jedi and he thinks that puts them a little bit at risk, as all these people are in their sort of territory. But he does approve Lorna D to send some of her crew to raid a planet called Elfrona, I believe, and kidnap a family that was a wealthy family that had kind of done this, hipster-esque thing to like go out and live off the land in an outer rim planet. But they know that if they kidnap them and hold them for ransom, their wealthy family would pay that, and that would be a big catch for the Nile as a general, as a whole. At this time, sort of the Republic is coming out of what they've seen as, the main element of the great disaster. And they're piecing together the legacy run to try and see what happened, who and what is missing still from the ship. And at this time, these things are called, they're coined as emergences, are still happening, which is basically after the initial wave of all the pieces of Legacy Run coming out of hyperspace. Some pieces were still in the hyperspace lane and are emerging at different points and different times throughout the galaxy. And those are coming to sort of catastrophic events. They don't know when they're coming out. They don't know where they're coming out. And because of that, it makes it really hard to stop them. So it's really just a luck thing of if they come out and they're safe, or if they come out and cause some damage. So they're trying to figure out where the black box is within the ship and where it might come out, and trying to sort of figure out where more of these emergencies could occur. And this is where Josh mentioned earlier that Kevin Tarr had sort of been tracking where all these different pieces had originally come together and trying to put together the piece of the puzzle, and comes up with a solution that if he's able to have, with the help of the Republic and the help of anyone that is able to source together tens of thousands of Navi droids, he can sort of create this huge web of systems that would use the existing data of where the emergencies had happened and what trajectory they were and what pieces of the ships were correlated with everything, that he'd be able to predict where all the remaining emergencies would happen so that someone could be in position to either capture some survivors or blow up pieces of debris so that doesn't cause any more damage. And also narrows down a window of sort of where the black box would occur so that they can use that to determine why did this actually happen and would this happen again within the hyperlanes. The big reason there is that they've had to sort of pause travel within hyperspace or make it limited to like government travel only during this window because they don't know if it's safe. And that's sort of isolated the outer rim territories and slowed down a lot of the economies and a lot of the trade, and starting to, upset the people as well as cause some like actual issues like risk of starvation and things like that for people that are sort of trapped outside of these hyperspace lanes. Within this period, so Avar, Chris, and Elzar Mann, who we had talked about before, that are two Jedis that had a long history with each other, they go to visit Marlo and Velis Santeca, and the Santecas are sort of the group that's kind of leading the field and charting the hyperspace lanes. And they try to get them any information from them, whether they know how this happened, could this happen again? And they are very vague in their answers and are clearly hiding something. Elzar senses that they're hiding something, and only with some pushback from Avar resists using some Jedi mind trick to make them spill the beans on what they're hiding. They clearly think that they might know someone that could be sort of doing this in their sort of discussions that we see from them, but we don't get too many details yet. But they do say that like what happened should not be possible. And they do offer up their sort of considerable resources. They're seen as extremely, extremely wealthy. And so they offer a lot of resources to the Republic to sort of assist in this process of solving this mystery. In this sort of immediately follow-up moment, we find out that the paths are being mapped by another Santeca that's really old, ancient, meant to be, over 100 years old, should be dead right now, Mari Santeca, that was used by Martian's father, and just through technology and different equipment is sort of being kept alive, and believes that she's still sort of prospecting. She's not entirely all in her sort of sound mind, thinks that she's still prospecting for the traditional hyperlanes with the Santecas, and has been inadvertently sort of delivering these paths just because she's so skilled at finding these routes within the galaxy, and has been delivering the paths to Martian and previously his father, both functioning as the Eye of the Nile, that are being used for the Nile's raids. In amidst all of this, we jump over to Bell, Zettifar, and Loden Greatstorm, who are back on Elfrona, where they were sort of training, and were introduced to Indira Stokes and Porta Engel, who are two other Jedis amidst their sort of outpost on this planet. And we get a little bit more training with Bell and Loden, but we're quickly sort of introduced to this raid that's been happening, that's being led by Lorna D to his family. And they all quickly sort of move in to assist with that. By the time they arrive, there's been a bit of a small skirmish led by some droids that were controlled by the family that was being kidnapped, and they arrived to find the family missing. But given the weird sort of atmosphere of this planet and the fact that this family was able to fight back a little, the Nile are escaping on the back of essentially some farm animals. And so the Jedi hop on some as well to give chase. And they also have one remaining sort of ship to be able to give chase to this, in which they're able to catch up to the family and rescue the wife of the family, before we sort of jump away from that storyline for a little bit. And that point, we start to learn a little bit more about the Nile's involvement from the view of the Republic. So there's kind of a casual sort of, I guess, like, thank you for, averting the great disaster in a sense going on. And some of the survivors are there. And one of the Jedi speaks with us, one of the children who happened to see sort of what had gone down when the Legacy run broke, and saw a ship with 3 lightning strikes on it, which was kind of a symbol of part of the Nile, which starts to lead them to believe that theirs was not just hyperspace having an error, or the ship being an error, or a user sort of pilot error, that there actually was a ship somehow in this lane that should not have been there, that they were trying to avoid. We then jump over to Kassav, who is a little bit irked by Martian Row sort of not letting them do any raids at that time, and clearly sort of the front runner for someone that could turn on Martian Row as time goes on, based on the way they describe him. Because of the paths, they're able to know a bit more about where the emergencies are already going to run ahead of the Republic. And he moves into an area called Iriadu, I believe is what it was called, and tries to extort them, saying like, hey, there's one of these pieces is going to jump out. It's going to destroy your plan. It's going to destroy your area. And you should basically pay us money to do this. Leading into this sort of extortion process, he and his crew do a ton of drugs that they basically describe. And so after they've gone through this process and gotten some money from this group, they go to, destroy the piece of debris that's came out, and they like overshoot it because their pilot and their navigator was basically high and did the calculations wrong. And this debris destroys this planet that they say kills over 1 billion people. And in the midst of it, a lot of these other people that are still in space are able to track his ship. So they know that it's his ship, that it's piloted by Kassav, and that, based on some of the stuff, that this is potentially the Nile being involved in this, as he makes his sort of flee to get back to the rest of the Nile and sort of cover up what he's done. Kevin Tarr's plan then sort of comes together to be able to track the remainder of these emergencies. It's a really cool sequence where all of his droids start to overheat and start to blow up, and it's coming down to the wire of like whether this process of being able to create all these predictions is going to occur. And Avar Chris and Elzar Mann sort of come together and basically generate some cold weather, like draw in some precipitation out of the sky to cool down all their machines and let this process occur. But it allows them to then start predicting where all the emergencies are going to come, and be ready to sort of stop them as they come out or capture survivors. It does lead them to where they're able to go through a few different spots where they think the black box is going to be coming out. Um, and Lorna D, we understand that there is some sort of spy within the Republic. She's sort of positioned at each of those to try and capture the black box to sort of cover up their uh, involvement, the Nile's involvement, knowing that the black box would sort of reveal that maybe one of their ships was the cause of the hyperspace problem. And in the midst of this, the black box appears. Lorna D sort of takes a run for it, and it's kind of, she also similarly fails at that and kind of has to retreat back to the Nile. At this point, Martian Rowe confronts sort of his Tempest runners. He cuts off Kasav's hand and sends him to sort of intercept the black box as they're moving it from one place to another, because he has this spy within the Republic, and says like, hey, like they have it, but it's not, not all is lost yet. So he sends him to sort of recover that, and then also sends Lorna, after her sort of failed attempt to recover the black box, to go down to Elfrona, where they know that this hostage situation is sort of going awry, as the Jedi are starting to chase after them and have already recovered one of the hostages. And that's where the part 2 of the Paths starts to conclude. It's definitely the beefiest section of the book.
Yeah.
I think when I was looking at it in terms of just like where my Kindle percentages were tracking, that you get into it around 30%, but you don't start in this section until you're about close to 80% or more within the book. So it's definitely a very dense chunk of the book, and compared to the other 2 parts, but it definitely has a lot of interesting stuff that we can start to discuss.
Yeah, first off, Scott, kudos to marathoning through that outline. That was a lot of stuff to cover. A lot, happens in this section. To kick it off, I think the introduction to the Nile, which we see them kind of attacking these. I guess I'll describe them as refugees. These folks who are fleeing another planet that's being impacted by these emergencies.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't just attack these ships; they quite literally pull them apart while there are people inside fleeing from this disaster. So right away, we understand that these are, are bad people. They're not nice at all. And I thought, the introduction of Marchion and the other Tempest runners was really interesting, and kind of that hierarchy of that organization, the dynamics that exist between those. There's, as you said, Scott, this kind of underlying tension between them, and it almost takes on this, this Game of Thrones-esque quality of like they're plotting and scheming behind each other's backs to take advantage of any moment of weakness. So for me, this section was really cool because I think at the beginning, it's kind of like the origin story of the Nile, and like you said, Scott, they're basically marauders, and yeah, they're bad and they do bad stuff, but they're pretty low profile at the beginning of the section, and by the end, we start to see Martian's kind of plans start to crystallize, and we realize, okay, this is just kind of the beginning of what they will eventually become in this High Republic story, which is going to be much badder than we even see at the beginning.
Yeah, I thought the amount of stuff we got on the Nile was surprising to me. Like, I just didn't think we'd see too much of them in the first book, or get a lot of depth on who they are and what they are. I think you mentioned it, Scott, that they had said that the Vikings were a big thing they based it off of. I'm not sure if either of you have watched the TV show Vikings, but I actually feel like they based it even more on the TV show Vikings, because the like lead character of that show, Ragnar, like he finds the way across the water basically, and that is like what gives him his power. And there's these jarls, these various like earls of those areas that have their kind of own control, like these Tempest runners, and I think that they're always wanting to overthrow him. Like it's like a constant thing that they want to, but they just can't because he has that bit of knowledge. And I think that's really cool as far as a concept, and even cooler that when they first introduce it, you think he's developed something that's special, but the truth is he's got this old woman that's like on life support, basically telling him the way. Like it's a very fragile hold on power, and I think that's a really cool basis for a character. They also really described him a lot in like the event we watched as being just like really ruthless, and I feel like he obviously is ruthless. I mean, you know, like that moment he cuts off Kosov's hand is wild, but he's also kind of empathic and seems to kind of like feel what's going on amongst these people a little bit. Seems a little unsure. He's more visionary than planner. He knows what his end goal is, but not exactly how he's going to get there.
Mhm.
And I think that makes that like unpredictable and a little scarier than what we've had in Star Wars, which is traditionally like the villain is a chess player. He doesn't quite seem to be that to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I even think in the next section he makes a comment about, you know, not necessarily making plans, but being more focused on the goal and there being multiple paths to one goal. But the whole concept or idea of Mari Santika, you know, and having her basically be this hostage for um, most of her life, because they indicate that she was kidnapped when she was 6 years old, and now she's over 100 years old, and they're keeping her alive, you know, on the thread. Essentially, she's not doing very well. It's a pretty dark, twisted concept, and I think just again shows how kind of despicable and evil Martian is, and how, you know, willing he is to do whatever it takes to get ahead. So I thought that was just a fascinating. Also, we should mention, you know, really cool connection to canon with the inclusion of the Santeca family. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
we have Lore Santeca in the sequel trilogy, Force Awakens. He's the character that Poe Dameron goes to see to get the map, the missing map piece to Luke. We also see a bit of him in, I believe, the Poe Dameron comic series, and then also um, he's featured in a flashback in the Rise of Kylo Ren comic, helping Luke and Ben kind of explore Jedi temples across the galaxy. So, really thought that was a cool tie into canon without, you know, seeming to be forced. It kind of made sense, and I think enriched that character of Laura Santeca in that this family is just, you know, naturally gifted in prospecting and exploration. For whatever reason, they have this gift of kind of uh, you know, navigating hyperspace lanes. I thought that was a really cool concept, and also kind of enriched the overall Star Wars in a cool way.
Yeah, I think Lore Santeca totally drew me in the sequel trilogy to start with, which Star Wars is always pretty on the nose about these things. I mean, his name is Lore, so like
Yeah.
were trying to get us with that. But as soon as I got to that part in the book, I was like out loud, like, "Oh, this is awesome!" Like I was so excited that there was like a tie-in to that character, just because he seems like he has some sort of very deep family lineage and history to the Jedi. Now like making them these like space prospectors and early explorers was really cool. I did want to like get your guys' thoughts though on Mari, because like they never explicitly state how she's doing that, or at least I didn't quite pick up on it. Like, is it that she knows these paths from what they've done, or is that she has kind of a force ability herself
Mm-hmm.
to connect and sense this? How did you perceive that?
I got the sense that because the Santecas were like known for this, like even prior to Marlowe and Velis were sort of the heads of the Santecas in this time frame, and that the Nile had been around prior to Martian, like that his father was running it, and we know that Martian has spies in different places that potentially, it was apparent at a young age that she was finding these unique things. Marlowe and Velis are aware that, they, when it's they're talking to each other sort of aside. They're like, could it be her? Like, no, she'd be long dead. Like they clearly know that if this is happening, like, and if it was somehow possible that it would be Mari, somehow able to have tracked these things or cause travel through light space that way. But so I wonder if that, because sort of they know that, and the fact that they had made this effort to kidnap her, that somewhere early along in her life, even as a young child, it was apparent that she had these abilities. I kind of almost envisioned the way they're treating her as like the Cognizants from Minority Report, where they kind of just have them strapped up.
Exactly what I thought too.
They have them strapped up to these life support machines, and they're basically, because of what they're able to do, it makes them like very easy to disconnect from reality, and they're keeping them alive, but just basically have them laser focused on this task until they get worn out, and then they let them, rest up, and then keep repeating it.
Yeah. My take was that, similar to you, Scott, that she probably has some innate ability, whether that's the Force or just kind of, some mad genius. I would tend to think it was the Force, just because the way that they're describing her going into like this trance-like state seemed to particularly tie back to kind of what we're shown in the book that the Jedi are doing, like the Bar Chris kind of and others go into almost like this trance-like state when using the Force. So I think that would be an interesting, take on, well, this is Mari's Force skill. She's just really good at navigating hyperspace, and maybe that's something that was kind of passed down through generations of that family. Like that's just an innate Force connection they have.
Reminded me a lot of in Dooku Jedi Lost, the power of Sifo Dyas a little bit. That he does it in a sense of like more predicting the future, but it seemed to be in like a similar kind of almost schizophrenic type of like separation from himself way to do so, and that was sort of what they seem to be describing with her there. And of course, I will get to this on the last bit, but it seems like the Force might be what he's thinking is causing the power because of what he's trying to grab at the end.
Yeah, and I also wonder if maybe her kidnapping was Martian's father and kind of the Nile trying to do another, kidnapping for ransom, and then they realized that she had this ability and kind of exploited it and just decided to keep her. But again, this is maybe one of the most twisted and depressing ideas. Really interesting and fascinating from a story perspective, but also super sad that this person has been in captivity for, maybe over 100 years.
Yeah, and I mean, he shocks her at one point and stuff. I mean, like that's where, to me, he took his darkest turn began when they introduced Mari.
Yeah, Martian might be one of the cruelest Star Wars villains we've ever seen. I mean, clearly, like, Palpatine is evil and the worst of the worst, but in Martian, we really see just like this tendency to torture and be very cruel, which I don't really think we've seen that before in canon.
An interesting thing, again, with the audiobook version, the voice for Martian is super soft-spoken. And I thought that was almost more menacing.
More creepy,
he was just so kind of low and quiet, and it just shocks this woman to half-death. It's pretty interesting.
I picked that up in the book reading that, Dan. I think Soule makes a point of saying that Martian speaks pretty softly, and it's almost, again, like this unnerving calmness that he has that makes him more intimidating because he's so kind of soft-spoken. It's very strange.
Yeah, and I think that adds to the fact that until Kassav and Lorna come back from their sort of botched missions, that up until that point, there's definitely been a sense of like Martian thinks that one of these people is going to try and kill them. There's going to be some coup at some point, and that there kind of is this unspoken and almost also not unspoken like level of just disrespect towards Martian from the Tempest runners that they kind of know that they're stuck with him as the leader because of he controls the paths, and they don't understand the paths. They don't know that he has Mari Centeca creating these, and it's all locked away sort of within his ship. But yeah, you don't really see it until they return, and he just basically wails on and cuts off Kazov's arm. That you see that he is, you know, in some ways, like you were mentioning, Dan, like that it's when the goal is in reach, like he takes a path, you know, for that, but it's not really sort of planned out. Some stuff's definitely planned out, but it's not entirely planned out. That it's sort of once an opportunity appears in front of him, he can sort of turn on a dime and take advantage of it. Yeah. You know, and that in that case, it meant sort of raging in front of these two and sort of the scared straight moment for the Tempest runners.
I love the scene where he cut off Kostov's hand. Like it built tension really well, and you didn't quite think he would go forward with it, and then he just does it. I mean, he is ruthless.
And as ruthless as he is, it is kind of fun and entertaining to see him, you know, make that turn, because I think Soule does a really good job in this whole section up until that point of making you, you know, feel like Marchian's definitely a bad guy, but you don't get a lot of insight into what his objectives are fully, and then that's slowly revealed in a very satisfying way to the reader, which I really enjoyed. Something else that I really liked about this section was, you know, we have kind of parallel to learning all of this about the Nile, we have, as you mentioned, Scott, the Republic's kind of putting together this task force to investigate what happened with the Legacy Run, and Avar is leading that, and her and Elzar kind of going and meeting the Santecas. But during those scenes, you really start to get this insight into Elzar and Avar's relationship, and we learn that they have kind of been friends since they were younglings at the temple and kind of grew up together. Yeah, there's clearly, I mean, there's definitely this tension and like hidden romance between the two, which I thought was great in that, you know, it continues to show that the Jedi are very complicated and they have this code and they're not supposed to have attachment, but they're also human beings and they have, you know, natural kind of, you know, feelings and behaviors. So I thought that was really, really interesting and created this good dynamic between those two characters, and I'm excited to see where that goes.
Same. Yeah. Elzar, I think, is a really cool, unique kind of character as well. We've talked about Avar obviously quite a bit already, but they're definitely a little bit yin and yang in the way they view the Force, and because of that, it kind of draws them, I think, more and more together, and you see that throughout the story. But it's another example of, I think, you know, the author doing a great job just setting up for us this world in this time period with a lot of complex storytelling. This like underlying romance is, you know, Star Wars underlying romance is like the key to the entire original saga. So I think this will play a deeper and deeper role as we go further along.
Yeah, when Elzar, I think they meant this came up during the section of the book, but they make a point of saying that, you know, there's some Jedi that treat the Force almost as if it's something that should only be used here and there, and Elzar's kind of like, if there's no limit on the Force, like I'm going to use it for whatever I can and constantly be pushing the boundaries, which I thought was just a really, again, interesting perspective. Typically, you know, we've seen Jedi and Canon being so reverent about the Force and treating it as so sacred, and he's just very like matter of fact and practical about it. Like, yeah, I'm going to use it to like help this droid open this door. Like, why not? Why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Scott.
I was just say that, yeah, like we've traditionally seen like the Force respected as in this way of like, every use of it needs to be respectful. And his take on the respectfulness of it is like, it exists. I can use it. Why would I not use it? It's not, we're not going to, I think there's even a line. It's like, we're not going to run out of the Force. Like, so why wouldn't I use it to do things? Yeah. It is that moment around, like he sees someone struggling, you know, moving something. He just like, you know, with a little bit of Force pokes it back to them and makes their life a little easier. And he's like, I know that she's watching and would be like, why, was that a good use of the Force? But like, to me, that is what the Force is for. And this is why he, like, that's why he believes, he hasn't really been allowed to be promoted to Jedi Master, because he's exploring the Force and using it in any way he can, versus a little more of the traditional path of the Jedi.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Scott. I think that, in Elzar, we're maybe seeing some foreshadowing of what will come, later on in the prequel trilogy. Particularly, he feels like a kind of kindred soul to like Qui-Gon Jinn, in terms of like how he views the Force, and then we're already seeing maybe the seeds of the Jedi Order being overly legalistic with their view of the Force, and as you said, they're keeping Elzar from being a master. Which also pretty interesting. I don't know what you guys thought about this, but I thought it was pretty cool to learn kind of, the lifestyles of the Jedi a little bit, and kind of the life cycles. And they talked a little bit about, once you're a master, you kind of have a free pass to go and do whatever you want. And like, if you want to go and like study this or try this, like you're more or less given free reign. And then also, I guess, Jedi have an era where they do retire at some point, and they're given freedom to kind of go and do what they want. And Elzar and Avar are kind of already talking about, spending their retirement together, which is also pretty interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool, that whole section. I mean, they basically said that the temple will take care of them when they get old if they want to, but they really could just go where they want and retire where they want. And I'm curious now, like, could they do that in the prequel era? Did we know whether that was like a thing, or do they get more strict? I don't know. I just think it sets up like a lot of interesting new storylines about how far do they follow their rules. If you retire, can you now wed, or like what else is available to you at that point?
Sure.
Which is kind of
yeah. I think we saw that a lot with the Jedi Porter Engel that was on the outpost with Elfrona, and that they mentioned that once he became a master, he had done like 3 or 4 different roles throughout sort of the thing, and had kind of experienced all that you could as a Jedi. And then when he hit retirement, that he had the option to have this like comfy like research like life, in the Jedi Temple, and just hang out there. And that he chose to be positioned on an outpost where he basically was like the chef in a sense, like the way they're treating him. He basically was like the caretaker and just like there. But he clearly had this storied past. And I think they referenced his nickname was like the butcher of something, it like was known for at one point, just because he was like an incredible fighter with the lightsaber and whatnot. But yeah, it definitely is interesting that they kind of treat, reaching the master rank as like I don't know, like a tenured PhD professor, where it's like you are still going to have, Padawans and things like that and train, but you also then have this other freedom to explore the Force in whatever, ways you see fit.
Totally.
It reminded me a lot of the Maesters from Game of Thrones too.
Yeah.
Similar kind of thing, with them being like positioned in towns or with people or things like that.
Totally. Another maybe like point of foreshadowing that I thought was pretty cool. Once the task force gets their hands on the black box, the flight recorder, and kind of determines that the Nile are behind the disaster with Legacy Run, there's a debate amongst the Jedi, and there's a Jedi Council meeting where they are talking about, do we get involved in this conflict? Do we actually like go to war? And ultimately do decide to get involved in the conflict, but it's pretty contentious. I think, it's basically a tie vote, and then it's broken by one of the Jedi. Help me out here with the name. Oh, Jorah
Mali.
Yeah.
Jorah
Who wanted
Mali,
to go from the beginning, really, but kind of
Jorah Mali, who I guess she's slated to be Marshal of
the Starlight Beacon.
So she breaks the tie and ultimately gets them involved. But as I was reading that, clearly, had in mind the Clone Wars and kind of, the Jedi getting, pulled into that conflict, and that ultimately leading to their destruction. But just really interesting foreshadowing.
I thought it was cool too with the Jedi Council that now we know Yoda was in this, and Yoda is not actually on the council at the moment. Like he has a person standing in for him, but Yariel Poof is there, and so is Oppo Rancisis, and I thought that was just cool that there was more continuity on the council over a much longer period of time than we realized. Which shame on them; they should have known better, I guess. With that much time under their belt.
And quite a few Jedi too that are like up there in age. Like I think Porter Angle too is a few centuries old, right? Yeah.
Cool character.
Yeah, I liked that. I mean, the I didn't touch on it in the summary as much, but in the midst of all this, you do have these segments where you do jump back to a Coruscant and have the Jedi Council debating briefly, but then you also have Chancellor Lina So kind of negotiating with some of the military leads and some of the council and other dignitaries to try and make sure that they're closing hyperlanes and communicating that to each other and getting aid to these different outer rims while they're trying to sort out whether these emergencies are going to stop or keep happening or if this is just a one-time event, and then making sure that they're appropriating thousands and thousands of Navidroids and things like that to do that. So you do have this balance where in this time, you definitely see the initiative of Chancellor So, who coins it all behind these great works that she's going to be sort of achieving under her leadership. But it really is sort of pushing towards this unity across the galaxy as a whole. Right. And that, they might be in Coruscant where they're sort of, basically kind of hidden from war at this time, or even, just any sort of, poverty of any kind, in the world that they live in. But they are taking efforts to try and sort of grow the galaxy and make sure communication can go between them. And, that the Starlight Beacon really is such a key effort behind that.
Yeah, and something else that I thought was pretty interesting, and I'm assuming Soule wrote this, or started writing this, a few years ago. But particularly with the hyperspace lanes being shut down, and I think Chancellor So even refers to it as a quarantine at one point. It definitely made me think of our current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, but was eerily kind of
I thought
similar.
That too.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was hindsight bias or something feeling that way, but I felt like a lot of the book seemed to mirror our lives during coronavirus as the great disaster equivalent.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think even more so because they continuously refer to the hyper lanes as being sick. They are just there wasn't just oh, it was a car crash basically, or that there was something, with an engine. They describe it multiple times as that, it appeared sick to them.
That's right.
And we've seen that sort of red stuff in some other mediums before where they've depicted as red when something's going wrong in hyperspace. But definitely had that eerie sort of mirror image of today's current climate.
It was interesting too. There's, I don't think we mentioned this, but there's a senator who kind of represents the outer rim interests. And I think he's from Serrano, which I believe is Dooku's planet. I believe it's Senator Noor, maybe is his name, but he kind of presents the opposing viewpoint to Chancellor So's plan, and he's like, we need to keep these hyperlanes open. These, if we shut these down, people aren't going to go look at the supplies, and that creates this kind of ongoing, conflict for the Chancellor. Another thing, Scott, that you mentioned the radio, situation with SF trying to to hold them hostage, so to speak. It's interesting. I was looking it up and I forgot, but that is actually Harkin's home planet.
Oh.
So another interesting connection. And
that's interesting.
I know that I think in one of their most recent one-shot comics, maybe Age of Rebellion, they did one with Tarkin and cover kind of him being a hunter and having this hunter mentality, which they reference that planet being very big into being hunters and being
That's
very warlike. Yeah, very cool.
I thought that planet left a lot open for some cool storytelling as well. I mean, we've
Yeah,
known about Mandalorians, of course, being like that, but this is
Hmm.
a whole
yeah,
different culture.
yeah.
I did want to mention one quick thing again from the audio book side of it that was just hilarious. But every time Kassav appeared and attacked, they went into playing this like heavy metal Star Wars music.
Oh my gosh.
And like that
Now,
was his
now I gotta listen to the audiobook. Like you sold me on that.
yeah,
they
it's so funny.
that makes sense because they actually mention specifically with him. They mention with the Nile, but specifically with him multiple times that like when they are in like a raid mode, that his ships are playing this music, and I forget the term they use, but it's it's basically like
Metal, like
it's
being
like
bad.
yeah, it's like it's called like shipcore or something like that, where it's like it's
Yeah,
made from like the noises of your ship and like other just like grinding things combining into just this like
yeah,
blaring noise. And they reference that they're his crew specifically, the Nile, it seems like as a whole does, but his crew specifically like does a lot of weird drugs and spice stuff before they go on these raids. So yeah, that makes sense that they would include that in the audiobook. That's funny.
Yeah, there's some fun stuff with the audiobook. It is worth it sometimes, I think, just because they add so many sound effects and things like that. But it reminded me of Wonder Woman appearing in Justice League, like when you hear the like ramped
oh
up
yeah, yeah,
music every
Like
time.
metal theme, yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
That's
good.
funny. Yeah, that's cool. That and then we had talked about it on another stuff, but they did put out like a kids version of A Great Jedi Rescue, which is this short book, but it basically covers the Great Disaster and is a cool way to see this in like a truncated way, but it lets you see what the Jedi look like, what the vectors look like, what the long beam ship looks like. So you're able to get a lot of these visuals since a lot of this stuff is just like brand new elements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think overall, the book was very like cinematic, right? Like a lot of these scenes, you could just kind of see them playing out in a blockbuster movie. They're so epic
Mm-hmm.
and big in scope. I would love to see the vectors and things like that in a film or TV show. I hope they have some plans to show some of this era in other media.
Also, Lucasfilm Games, if you are listening, I want to fly a Vector really bad. So make that possible.
Yep.
Anything else we missed on this section, or should we move on to?
Just one note of just the Kevin Tarr thing.
Yeah.
Just hitting him again. Like, I thought it was so cool when the Jedi created rain to cool down the machines. I again think that was another power we've not seen, and a continuation of the X-Men theme here. We got our storm moment, but it was definitely cool to see that. The three of us are in the tech world, and like we've dealt with listening to, I think, a lot from programmers about needing more computational power. It felt like something, really real, and the way they did it with droids was, I thought, really cool.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'll mention before Scott, you walk us through the final section. Kassav has a member of his crew called Wet Bub.
Wet Bub.
Who is a Gungan, first of all, which is amazing. We have like a Gungan villain for the first time. And he got his name because he'd come back from raids covered in blood. And I'm just like, all right, how I feel like they sat in the room, they were just like, how do we make Gungans badass? And they're like, we'll just make this guy covered in blood after he raids.
If I was to choose a single favorite character that was introduced in this, Wet Bub has to be it. Just because the way, they just describe him as a Gungan that got a nickname for being covered in blood from battles, and raids.
Yeah.
It was really cool that the Nihil were not a species, but like a collective like that. I don't know if we mentioned too much on that front, but I thought that was a very cool addition. I know like early on their board for like ideas was like, diversity and inclusion and things like this. And I don't think people probably took it the way that it actually meant in this case. Like this was like a group of villains that were all from various parts of the universe aligned together with this goal for money and freedom, I guess.
Yeah, it almost takes on like a cult-like
Mhm.
feeling, and I think Marchion definitely kind of taps into that and says something along the lines of like they're all looking for something to believe in or belong to, and you definitely get the sense that here's like this diverse collection of different people who have migrated into the Nile, but it is literally all types of species and all walks of life. And yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting because it almost is a really good like mirror to We Are the Republic. Like We Are the
Mhm.
Republic is like we are everybody, all species, all planets, and the Nile is kind of the same, but
I think
almost
they
like this
stole.
dark inverse.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
Yeah,
they
we'll
stole
get
their
we'll get to
motto.
that, but
Yeah.
yeah, that they eventually lead into that. Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's a good point to bring up. That yeah, they really are. They allow them and kind of endorse them to be a little more unique within the Nile, and even the three Tempest runners have their own sort of style. You know, like one of their ships is
Oh
kind of
yeah.
like scrapped together with like things that they need in it, and then one of them they always say is like super fashionable, and the ship is
Mm.
like nice and crisp and clean, and like clearly spends all their like money on things to like enhance it versus just necessities and whatnot. So yeah, the Nile definitely are I feel like the bulk of this third is dedicated to sort of introducing us to
Yeah.
sort of every element of the Nile in a really good way. I think they do a great job of bringing them into the story.
Yep.